Hey everybody, thanks for tuning in. Today we're going to be talking about getting a grip. The reason why I titled this teaching Get a Grip is because it is inspired by one of my favorite people in the Bible, Paul. Paul is a New Testament writer. He's also one of the apostles and a legacy. He pretty much revolutionized the church. And although there are many stories that you might have heard about him, one of the things that really sticks out to me about Paul is the essence of his character. He has two qualities that I believe really define who he is, and that is that he is tenacious and he is bold. Tenacious is actually the definition of someone who has a firm grip on something. And someone who is bold is someone who's just willing to take risks, think innovatively, and pretty much someone who's confident. And I think we can all agree that those two characteristics pretty much really define Paul. And I want to specifically talk about the book of Philippians. So we're not going to go through it all today, but I do encourage you to take this book and dig into it. It's only 4 chapters long, but I promise you, I could not get through chapter 1 in one day. I just felt there was so much there. These are actually some letters that Paul wrote to the church of Philippi after his mission trips there. So I want to give you guys a little bit of some fun facts of the church of Philippi. Before it was a church, obviously, it's actually a city that Paul goes and travels to first with Silas. And when they get there, they don't find too many Jews. In fact, there weren't even enough Jews to have a synagogue. So they end up traveling about 1.5 miles from the center near a river where they hope to find maybe a meeting place of some sort of the Jewish people of the town. And they do. Paul ends up really talking to women there. They receive Christ, primarily this woman named Lydia that we hear about in Acts chapter 16. And she's actually key to the church, even though we only see her for a really short time. And she ends up just receiving Christ. Her whole household is saved, and she opens up the doors to her house for Paul and Silas. Right after that, also in chapter 16 of the book of Acts, we hear about Paul in Philippi, where he sees a girl who is she has a spirit of divination in her, and Paul prays over her. She is freed from the spirit, but right after that, Paul and Silas get severely beaten and flogged, and they get thrown into prison for doing so. For those of you who don't know, being flogged is pretty much what we saw in the movie The Passion of the Christ, where Jesus is being hit with these sticks that have a ball at the end with spikes, and when they get hit, it really just takes skin out with it. So it's definitely one of the cruelest punishments of the time. So I really wanted to get you in the mindset of a glimpse of the life that Paul lived. We do hear a lot of his awesome stories, but we tend to think about crowds following him and people receiving Jesus and how he revolutionized the church. But none of that happened with the hard sacrifices that Paul decided to go through and endure. So let's dig into Philippians chapter 1. A lot of the first part is really Paul greeting the church of Philippians. Remember, these are letters that he wrote to them after his missions trip there. And what I want to focus on is Philippians chapter 1, verse 12 on. And I'm going to read it real quick. It says, "I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel." Side note, he's writing this while in prison again, probably in Rome. "So that it has become known throughout the whole imperial guard and to all the rest that my imprisonment is for Christ. And most of the brothers, having become confident in the Lord by my imprisonment, are much more bold to speak the word without fear." Verse 15, "Some indeed preach Christ from envy and rivalry, but others from goodwill. The latter do it out of love, knowing that I am put here for a defense of the gospel. The former proclaim Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, but thinking to afflict me in my imprisonment. What then? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is proclaimed, and in that I rejoice." If we keep on going, verse 29, it says, "For it has been granted to you that for the sake of Christ you should not only believe in him, but also suffer for his sake, engaged in the same conflict that you saw I had and now hear that I still have. So what I wanted to get at with this is, I don't know if you grasped it, but after verse 15 we read that, this man has sacrificed his life for the gospel. He has been in prison multiple times. He's been beaten and flogged. He's running away. It's not like he's seen these crazy things happen, And as he's sitting in jail again, he's hearing about all these false teachers trying to teach in the name of Christ. And instead of getting really angry and frustrated about it, he rejoices in the fact that even though these people think, they might be doing whatever they're doing, Christ is still being proclaimed. Whichever way, Christ is still being proclaimed. We must imitate the attitude of Paul. And what is that? He had an attitude of tenacity, of being bold and being joyous despite any situation. We hear at the end of Philippians that he could do all things in Christ who strengthens him. But when you put that into context of what he is writing, it doesn't just mean that, oh yeah, I can do everything in Christ who strengthens me, and you just kind of throw that out there, like it's nothing. It has really a deep meaning. It has weight to those words, and that weight is all the suffering and all the endurance that he's had. So where does that tenacity comes from? And that's what I want to talk to you guys today about, is that tenacity comes from having a grip on his salvation. He has a grip on his purpose. He has a grip on who God is in his life and what his calling is. So my question is, have you ever asked yourself, what is my purpose in life? What am I called for? And I mean, even if you believe to be a Christ follower, have you ever dared to ask the question, do I have a grip on my salvation? Am I really saved? And I'm not trying to ask that to question your salvation. I'm trying to ask that so you can find your grip on your salvation in Christ. And this is why. Because when we don't have a firm grip on the grace that has been poured over us through the death of Christ, when we don't have a firm grip on what it really means to be saved, on what it means to be called for a purpose, on what it means to be ambassadors of Christ, then we are not going to be tenacious and bold with our community, with our family, with our friends, and with our calling. And we would live the rest of our lives thinking that when we went to church and received, a word and praised Jesus, and maybe served a little bit in our church home, that was it. And that's not it. That is not it. That is not what it means to be an ambassador of Christ. That is just a small, tiny part of being part of the church of God. So what is stopping you today from fulfilling your purpose? What is stopping you today from being tenacious and bold about Christ? Is it that you have been focusing maybe too much on the stumbling block in front of you? That you can't see the bigger picture of Christ? See, Paul, when we read that verse in Philippians, he's not short-sighted. He is not focused on the four walls that are imprisoning him. He's not focused on, the scars and the persecution. He's not focusing on the event that is going on at the time afflicting him. His eyes are on the Lord. His eyes are on the plan that God has set forth for him and for his people. So he knows that all things work for good for those who love God. He lives on the fact that he can do all things in Christ who strengthens him, because he is walking in his purpose with God in him, and he can do it all because he is doing God's will. So if you are frustrated, if you are starting out with God, it doesn't matter what season you might be living in your life or in your walk with Christ. Always go back to the presence of God. Go back to his word and ask yourselves the hard question. Am I saved? Do I know my calling? Do I have a grip on who God is? Do I have a grip on his word in me, in the promises that he might be giving me, in the instructions that he has for my life? And when we do so, then we can walk in obedience. We can walk confident. We can be bold and tenacious and really see the signs, miracles, and wonders that God has for our lives. So I hope you enjoyed today's teaching, and thanks for watching. Tune in next Thursday for another video, and join the movement with us to reach the least of these by He who is greater than.